The soft hum of the city filled the glass-walled office that overlooked Manhattan. The morning light spilled across the sleek black desk of Ethan Cross, a man once described by Forbes as the coldest dealmaker in real estate. He sat in silence, his fingers resting on a pen that hadn't moved for several minutes. The skyline he'd built half of stared back at him like a taunt. He was worth hundreds of millions, had everything money could buy, yet the emptiness inside him was louder than the ticking clock on the wall. On the far end of the office, his assistant, jarred, peeked through the open door. "Sir, the vendor from Crestview Interiors is here to show you the new design samples for the downtown tower," he said. Ethan didn't even look up. "Send them in," he muttered. He turned a page on the contract in front of him, pretending to care. His mind wasn't in the numbers anymore. It hadn't been for months. Not since his ex-wife, Leela, had walked out 2 years ago after a decade of marriage. The tabloids had called it a high-society implosion. To Ethan, it was more like an earthquake that kept shaking long after the dust settled. The elevator chimed and footsteps echoed closer. He looked up, and the pen in his hand fell to the floor. Standing by the door was a woman, maybe early 30s, with auburn hair tied neatly into a bun and soft green eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. For a few seconds, Ethan forgot to breathe. She looked exactly like Leela. The same delicate jawline, the same slight tilt of her lips when she smiled nervously, even the same tiny freckle near her right eyebrow. "Mr. Cross," she said gently, "I'm Emma from Crestview Interiors. Thank you for meeting with me today." Ethan blinked, trying to gather himself. His throat went dry. "Yes, of course," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please have a seat." Emma smiled, unaware of the storm raging behind his calm expression. She set her leather portfolio on the table and began spreading out samples, textures, fabrics, and renderings for luxury suites. Her hands moved gracefully, but Ethan barely registered what she was saying. His mind was slipping in and out of the past. Leela on their first date, brushing her hair from her face. Leela laughing at his terrible attempt at cooking. Leela walking away with tears in her eyes, saying, "You've forgotten how to feel." "Mr. Cross," Emma said softly. He jerked back to the present. "I'm sorry, please continue." She tilted her head slightly. "Are you okay?" Her voice had the same warmth, the same tenderness that Leela once used when she tried to reach through his walls. Ethan gripped the edge of his desk. "I'm fine," he lied. Emma continued, flipping through design sketches. She was bright, articulate, and composed, qualities that mirrored Leela's confidence before life beside Ethan had worn her down. The meeting lasted an hour, though for Ethan it felt like a lifetime. Every glance, every word pulled ghosts out of the corners of his mind. When Emma finally stood to leave, she smiled again. "Thank you for your time. I'll have the updated proposals sent to you by Friday." Ethan rose automatically, still staring. "Wait," he said as she turned to go. "Have we met before?" Emma frowned, caught off guard. "I don't think so. This is my first project with your firm." He hesitated, then forced a tight smile. "Of course, my mistake." As the elevator doors closed behind her, Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. He sat down heavily, rubbing his temples. Jard appeared in the doorway again. "Everything okay, sir?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the city again, the same skyline he'd once shared with Leela on countless nights. "Find out everything you can about that woman," he said quietly. Jard blinked. "Emma from Crestview." "Yes," Ethan's tone was flat, but his eyes were sharp. "Everything." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The city's lights outside his penthouse window danced across the ceiling as memories of Leela refused to fade. He poured himself a drink and stared at his reflection in the glass wall. He hated what he saw. The money, the power, the tailored suits, all of it had come at the cost of something far greater. Leela had told him once, One day, you'll build so much that you won't have any room left to feel. And she'd been right. But Emma, she had stirred something in him, something he thought had died years ago. The next morning, Jard dropped a file on his desk. "Sir, here's what I found." Ethan opened it, scanning quickly. Emma Reynolds, 31, originally from Boston, graduated top of her class in design, moved to New York 3 years ago, worked with several architectural firms before joining Crestview. No criminal record, no controversies. And then he saw it, her emergency contact, Margaret Holloway. Leela's mother. Ethan froze. He stared at the page, his pulse pounding in disbelief. It couldn't be a coincidence. He stood up abruptly. "Cancel all my meetings," he said. "I'm going to Crestview." Jard blinked. "Sir, is there a problem?" Ethan didn't answer. As the elevator doors closed around him, his mind spun with questions that had no answers yet. Crestview Interiors was a chic, open studio full of plants, sunlight, and creative chaos. Designers moved briskly between drafting tables and laptops, but Ethan saw only one person, Emma, sitting by the window sketching something in her notebook. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled politely. "Mr. Cross, I wasn't expecting." "Who's Margaret Holloway?" he interrupted, more harshly than intended. Emma blinked, taken aback. "She's my aunt. Why?" Ethan's stomach twisted. "Aunt," he repeated. "Yes," Emma said, frowning slightly. "My mom's older sister. Why, do you know her?" Ethan's world tilted. Leela's mother was Margaret Holloway. That meant. He took a step back, shaking his head as pieces of the past began falling into place in ways that made no sense. Emma's expression softened. "Mr. Cross, are you sure you're okay?" He forced a smile, his mind racing. "I just needed to clarify something, thank you." He turned to leave, but Emma called after him. "Wait, Ethan, right?" He froze. "No one here calls you by your first name," she said, "but it feels like I've heard it before." Their eyes locked. A strange familiarity passed between them, deep and unspoken. "I'll see you soon," Ethan said quietly and walked away, his pulse still hammering. That night, Ethan pulled out a box from the back of his closet, a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, old letters, fragments of a life that had slipped away. One picture caught his attention. Leela at 23, standing beside her teenage niece, Emma. He sank into the chair, the photo trembling in his hands. So it was her. The same eyes, the same spark, but now grown, standing before him like the ghost of everything he'd lost. He stared at the photo until the lines blurred, until his chest ached with something raw and unfamiliar, regret. He had spent years burying his emotions beneath success, power, and loneliness. But now the past had come back, wearing a new face. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Cross wasn't sure if it was redemption knocking or punishment. Ethan didn't show up to the office the next day. For a man who hadn't taken a single sick day in a decade, it was strange enough to set off whispers among his staff. But Ethan didn't care. He sat at his penthouse window for hours, watching the rain streak down the glass like veins of silver. He kept staring at the photograph in his hand, young Emma and Leela at a beach, both laughing, their hair tangled by the wind. Leela had her arm around her niece's shoulder protectively, as if shielding her from the world. Ethan whispered to the empty room, "You never told me she grew up to look just like you." He felt foolish even saying it. Leela wasn't here to answer anymore. He hadn't seen her since the divorce, hadn't even known where she went. She'd simply vanished, leaving only silence and a line of final words he still remembered. "You won't understand what love means until you have nothing left to buy." And now here was Emma, her echo. By noon, he'd made up his mind. He needed to see her again. Crestview's glass doors slid open with a soft hiss as Ethan entered, umbrella dripping on the marble floor. Emma was at the front desk, talking with a client. When she turned and saw him, her eyes lit up, though she tried to hide her surprise. "Mr. Cross," she said, smiling politely, "you're back." He gave a faint smile. "I wanted to go over some of the design proposals and maybe talk." She tilted her head. "Talk about the project?" "Not exactly." The client excused himself, leaving them standing near the window where soft light filtered through the rain. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said quietly. "For how I acted yesterday, I was startled." "It's okay," she said. "You seemed distracted. Happens to everyone." He shook his head. "Not like that. You reminded me of someone I lost." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry." He hesitated, then added, "Her name was Leela." Emma blinked. "Leela Cross." Ethan looked up sharply. "You knew her?" Emma gave a small, wistful smile. "She was my aunt. We weren't that close in recent years, but when I was little, she was my favorite person in the world." Ethan's chest tightened. "I didn't know she still had family contact." "She kept her distance," Emma said, her voice gentler now. "After her marriage ended, she didn't talk much about it. But she always told me one thing, that she hoped the man she left behind would someday learn to be happy again." Ethan stared at her, words trapped behind the knot in his throat. Emma hesitated. "That was you, wasn't it?" He nodded once. "Yes." The silence between them deepened, heavy with ghosts. Later that evening, Emma met him at a quiet restaurant near the river. Ethan had asked for dinner, though neither of them seemed hungry. The air was filled with low jazz and the smell of rain on cobblestones. They talked first about work, then life, then slowly about Leela. "She used to say you were brilliant," Emma said softly, stirring her drink. "That your mind could build cities, but your heart didn't know how to build a home." Ethan's lips twitched into a sad smile. "That sounds like her." Was it true? He didn't answer at first. He stared into the glass of whiskey before him, watching the ice melt. "Yes," he said finally. "I was too busy winning to realize I was losing her." Emma's eyes were filled with something between empathy and sadness. "She never stopped caring, you know. I could tell. She just couldn't stay where she wasn't seen anymore." He looked at her closely. "And now you walk in, and I can't look at you without seeing her." Emma's hand froze on her glass. "That's not fair to either of us, Mr. Cross." "I know," he said quietly, "but I can't help it." The words hung between them, thick and unspoken. She looked away, cheeks flushed with something she didn't want to name. They left the restaurant and walked by the river. The city lights shimmered on the water like broken stars. Ethan stopped at the railing. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "what if I told you I don't believe in coincidences?" She gave a faint smile. "I'd say you sound like my aunt. She used to say everything happens when our hearts are ready to learn something new." He turned to her. "Then maybe I'm finally ready." Her eyes met his, searching. "Ready for what?" "For forgiveness," he said, "for feeling again." Over the next few weeks, Emma and Ethan saw each other often at work meetings, coffee breaks, long walks through the city. The more time they spent together, the less he saw her as a ghost of Leela, and the more he saw her. Emma was different. She was fierce where Leela had been gentle, independent where Leela had been patient. She challenged him, questioned him, laughed at him when he tried too hard to impress her. And yet through her presence, Leela's memory softened. One evening, Emma came to his office with a sample board. The sun was setting behind her, casting gold through the windows. Ethan couldn't stop watching her as she talked about the marble textures and lighting choices. She noticed. "You're doing it again," she said, smiling. "Doing what?" "Starring like I've said something profound, when all I did was talk about countertops." He chuckled. "You're more interesting than most people I know." "That's a low bar," she teased. But when he didn't laugh this time, her expression grew serious. "Ethan, I need to ask something." "Go ahead." "Are you seeing me, or are you still seeing her?" The question hit like a blade wrapped in silk. He looked down at the floor. I thought I knew the answer, now I'm not so sure. She nodded slowly. Then maybe you should figure that out before we go any further. With that, she gathered her things and walked out, leaving Ethan standing alone in the golden light, feeling emptier than before. That night, Ethan went back to his penthouse and found the courage to open one last drawer, the one that held Leela's final letter. He had never read it. The day she left, he had thrown it aside, too angry to face what it said. His hands trembled as he unfolded the paper. Ethan, if you ever find love again, let it be with someone who reminds you what it means to be human. Someone who doesn't see your money but your soul. When that happens, don't run from it. You'll know it's me, sending her to you. Leela. Ethan stared at the letter for a long time, tears finally breaking the dam he had built for years. Days passed before he saw Emma again. When he finally walked into Crestview, she was packing up after hours. He stopped by her desk, holding the old letter in his hand. Leela wrote this before she left, he said quietly. I never read it until now. She said, if I ever found someone who could make me feel again, it would be her way of sending a second chance. Emma's eyes glistened, unsure if she wanted to cry or smile. And you think that's me? I don't know, he admitted. But when I'm around you, I don't feel like a billionaire or a ghost. I just feel alive. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, maybe that's what she wanted. Ethan smiled faintly. She always was wiser than me. Emma stepped closer. And what now, Ethan? He took a slow breath. Now I stopped living in the past. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city was quiet, the streets glistening under the streetlights. Ethan and Emma stood by the window as the reflection of their faces blurred together, past and present, pain and healing. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel haunted. He felt human again. But just when peace seemed within reach, Jard called with news that would change everything once more. Sir, he said on the phone, his voice shaking, you need to see this. It's about Leela, she's not dead. Ethan froze, the world spinning around him. What did you just say? Jard's voice was low. She's alive, sir, and she's been living under a different name just outside Boston. The phone slipped from Ethan's hand. Emma's eyes widened in confusion. Ethan, what is it? She asked. He looked at her with disbelief, and a dawning fear that everything he thought he understood was about to unravel. She's alive, he whispered. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cross realized that the past wasn't done with him yet. Ethan's world tilted as Jard's words echoed in his mind. She's alive. For a long moment he couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. The phone lay on the floor, buzzing faintly, as if reality itself was calling him back. Emma knelt beside him, eyes wide with concern. Ethan, what's going on? He swallowed hard, his voice hoarse. Leela, she's alive, my ex-wife, your aunt. Emma's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked pale, the color draining from her face as if the air had been sucked out of the room. That can't be, she whispered. We were told she left the country. No one's heard from her in years. Ethan stood abruptly, packing to the window. His reflection stared back, a man who'd buried his heart only to have the past dig it up again. Jard said she's living under another name, outside Boston. Emma clutched her coat. Then we have to find her. Ethan turned to her sharply. We. She met his gaze steadily. She was my family, Ethan. If she's alive, I need to know why she disappeared. And you, she hesitated, you deserve the truth. 2 days later, they were on the road. The sleek black car glided down the highway as autumn leaves whipped past. Neither of them spoke much. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. It was filled with all the questions neither dared to ask aloud. Ethan's thoughts ran in circles. Why would Leela fake her disappearance? Was she running from him or something else? Emma sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, lost in her own storm. To her, Leela had been a symbol of grace and strength, the aunt who taught her to dream, who used to whisper, "Never let fear stop you from beginning again." And now she was alive. After hours of driving, they pulled into a small coastal town in Massachusetts, quiet streets, gray skies, the ocean stretching beyond the cliffs like an endless secret. Jart's lead had taken them to a modest house by the shore. Its white paint was chipped, but flowers bloomed along the fence. It looked nothing like the kind of place Leela Cross once lived. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped out of the car. He hesitated at the gate, his hand trembling. What if she doesn't want to see me? Emma touched his arm gently. You won't know until you knock. He took a deep breath and walked up the path. The door opened before he could even knock twice. There she was. Leela. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with silver, her face softer but still achingly familiar. The moment her eyes met his, the world fell away. For several seconds, they simply stared at each other, the air between them filled with everything unsaid. Finally she spoke. Her voice was calm but trembling. Ethan. He exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater. Leela, you're alive. I didn't die, she said quietly. I just stopped living that life. Emma stepped forward, her voice shaky. Aunt Leela. Leela's eyes filled with tears. Emma, she whispered, and for the first time in years she pulled her niece into a tight embrace. Ethan watched them, his emotions a whirlwind of relief, anger, and confusion. When Leela looked back at him, her expression was both sorrowful and resolute. Come inside, she said. You both deserve to know the truth. The living room was simple, no designer furniture, no marble floors, just a warm fire and books scattered everywhere. Leela poured tea, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, she said finally, looking at Ethan. I left because I was dying. Ethan froze. What? She nodded. The doctors found a rare autoimmune condition. They told me it was aggressive. I didn't want you to watch me fade away. You'd already lost yourself in your work. I couldn't bear the thought of becoming another burden you drown in guilt over. So I left quietly, changed my name, started over. Tears welled in Emma's eyes. But you survived. Leela smiled faintly. By some miracle, yes. The treatment worked slowly. And when I realized I might live, I didn't know how to go back. You both had lives now. And Ethan, she looked at him, her gaze softening, I didn't want to reopen old wounds. Ethan stared at her, his jaw tightening. You thought disappearing was kinder. I thought it was mercy, she said softly. I didn't want you to feel trapped in a tragedy. He stood abruptly, packing toward the window. Do you know what it did to me, Leela? You left without a word. I thought I broke you. I tore this city apart trying to build something that could fill the hole you left. Leela's eyes shimmered, and did it. He turned back, his voice cracking. No, nothing ever did. The room fell silent. The fire crackled softly. Finally, Emma spoke, her tone trembling. Maybe it's time to stop running from what's left of love, all of us. Her words hung in the air like a fragile truth. That night they stayed at a small inn by the coast. The storm outside had grown fierce, waves pounding against the rocks below. Ethan sat by the window, staring into the darkness. He felt hollow and full all at once, anger, sorrow, relief, and something deeper he couldn't name. Emma knocked softly and entered. Can't sleep. He shook his head. I keep thinking about her, about everything I never said. Emma sat beside him. Then maybe tomorrow you say it. He looked at her, really looked at her. The kindness in her eyes, the quiet strength, the warmth that had somehow thawed him. You're more like her than you realize, he said softly. Emma smiled faintly. She raised me to be brave enough to love broken people. His chest tightened. Then you should stay away from me. She shook her head gently. Or maybe I should stay until you realize you're not broken anymore. For the first time he smiled. a small, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes. The next morning, Ethan went back to the shore house. Leela was sitting on the porch, watching the sun rise. The sea shimmered gold beneath it. He sat beside her, silent for a while. Then he said, "I read your letter." Leela smiled softly. "It took you long enough." He laughed quietly. "I wasn't ready to face what it meant." "And now?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with peace and sadness. "Now I think you were right. You did send someone to remind me how to live again." Leela's lips trembled. "Emma." He nodded. "She's not you, Leela, but she's the bridge between what I lost and what I've finally found." Leela's eyes glistened. "Then maybe I did something right after all." They sat there for a long time, two people who had loved deeply, failed deeply, and finally forgiven deeply. When Ethan stood to leave, he leaned down and kissed Leela's forehead. "Thank you for coming back even for this." She smiled through tears. "Goodbye, Ethan." He hesitated. "Not goodbye, just peace." Back in New York, Ethan and Emma walked through Central Park in early winter. The air was cold, the trees bare, but sunlight filtered through the clouds. "I talked to her this morning," Emma said. "She's doing better. The doctors say the remission looks stable." Ethan smiled. "Good, she deserves that peace." They stopped by the lake. The water was still, reflecting the pale sky. "Do you ever think about how strange this is?" Emma asked. "How life circles back in the most unexpected ways?" Ethan nodded slowly. "All the time. But maybe that's how it's supposed to work. You lose what you think you need, only to find what you truly do." She looked at him, the wind brushing her hair across her face. "And what is it that you've found, Ethan?" He reached out gently, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "A reason to start again." She smiled, warm, genuine, alive. "Then let's start." And for the first time in years, Ethan Cross did. Not as the billionaire who built cities. Not as the man haunted by a lost love. But as someone who finally understood that even the coldest hearts could thaw. With enough truth, forgiveness, and time. Ethan, Leela, and Emma's lives never returned to what they were, but maybe that was the point. The past didn't need to be erased, it only needed to be faced. And somewhere by the ocean, Leela Cross watched a sunrise with peace in her heart, knowing that love in all its forms had finally found its way home.